Okay. Today we're beginning Masechta Rosh Hashana. Masechta Rosh Hashana. It's actually, if you look in Mishnah, Rosh Hashana is where we are learning right now. But you look in the Gemara, Rosh Hashana generally comes before Yom and Sukkah. But Pashtus, actually in the Rishonim as well, you can see that they argue how the order of the Gemara should be. The way we're learning is the way Mishnah is, and that's the Rambam learns is the correct way. The way our Shas is the way the Rif has the Gemara set up. And the Pashtus, the way we have it in the Gemara is chronologically. The way it's in Mishnah is we explain that why Rosh Hashana is where it is. The Rambam says it's only Yom Tov we haven't spoken about yet, so therefore they put Rosh Hashana here. And there were other reasons why the other Masechtas had to go first. And Yoma is written. Yoma is written in the Torah. Parshas Shkolim is a Parshas Kesisa, and Yoma is a Parshas Achrei. It gives Parshas Achrei, which is before Emma, which talks about the other Yom Tov. That's why right after Shkolim, Psachim is obviously first in the Torah. Shmos. That's why you have Shkolim, and then you have Yoma. And then after Yoma, the Rambam says we have to talk about Yom Tovim, but Sukkah has so many mitzvahs, so they decided to put Sukkah in first. Then we talk Be'er, generally Yom Tovim, and the only Masechta we still talk about is Rosh Hashana, so they put it here as if there's no particular reason why it's here. The other Gaonim say the reason why Rosh Hashana was left for last is because right after Rosh Hashana is Tainis, and the way it worked is that after that Rosh Hashana led into the new seasons. The winter season, which is one of the reasons why you fast if it doesn't rain. And that's why Rosh Hashanah is there. Well, Rabbi Levi Shabbatich, if I remember correctly, wants to learn that the machlekes between the setup of Mishnah and Gemara is when the world was actually created. If the world was created Rosh Hashanah, well, it makes perfect sense why Rosh Hashanah is Yom Hadin, because Adam Rishon then was judged for what he did, and he did a very chetei tzadas, and everything makes sense. No particular reason why. But if you learn, so therefore that's the order of our Gemara. Shana is first, and Yom Kippur, chronological. But if you learn the world was created in Nisan, then why in the world is Rosh Hashanah in Tishrei? In fact, we're learning the Gemara later after Zayin. The Gemara says, why do we daven? We say today, Zeh Yom Tov Ma'asecha, because the world is created in Tishrei. But if you hold the world was created in Nisan, according to in many poskim halach is that way. In fact, the calendar works that way. The Kufas, the seasons, as if it was created in Nisan. So if it was created in Nisan, why in the world was Rosh Hashanah on Tishrei? And the reason is because the Eibishter in his Chesed and Rachmim decided to bring Rosh Hashanah around Yom Kippur time, because Yom Kippur, the first time the Eibishter actually forgave the Yidden, when he came down, when Moshe came down the mountain with the second Luchas. So the Eibishter then decided to make Rosh Hashanah the first day of Rosh Hashanah. So Tzadikim, the Chtavin, and the Chtavim Alta, they get judged right away. But Beinim, the vast majority of people, they get judged on Rosh Hashanah, but they're given 10 days reprieve to be able to do tshuva, and on Yom Kippur they get forgiven. So therefore, the only reason why we have Rosh Hashanah is because of Yom Kippur, because otherwise the beginning of the year is Nisan. So therefore, Masechta Yoma comes first, and then goes Masechta Rosh Hashanah. Because Rosh Hashanah came the following year after Yoma, and that's the machlekes between Mishnah and Gemara when the world was created. That's how the Elisha wants to learn. Anyway, today we stay Rosh Hashanah standard is Tishrei, but actually the Mishnah says over here Arba Rosh Hashanah. Beginning of a year for any particular item is called Rosh Hashanah as well. So let's start from the beginning. We'll go there are 4 different Rosh Hashanahs. Number 1 is Be'echad Nisan. The very first day of Nisan is Rosh Hashanah for what? The Malachim. When it came to kings, for the Jewish kings, and they had to mark off the years, they used to write down on their stories. They used to write down either to the creation of the world, the Yetzirah, or they would write down to sometimes it's right, but they write down to the king. By Goyim, we did it for Shalom Malchus to show how we support the government, the local government, and by Eden we do it as we have a takana to it, so everyone knows exactly what year we're talking about. So we decided to make it that Rosh Chodesh Nisan, doesn't matter what day of the previous year he became a king, he was anointed as king, comes Rosh Chodesh Nisan, that's already he completed a year, now starts year number 2. And that's the Malachim. This is talking about Jewish kings. Goyish kings will be in Tishrei. all of the Golim. As far as Yom Tovim are concerned as well, what do we need to know when the first Yom Tov is? Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot is according to Reb Shimon, who says that if you promise to give a donation, a carbon, then you have, the Torah says you're over about to achre if you tardy too long. So according to Reb Shimon, it's 3 Yom Tovim, like the Tanakh as well, 3 Yom Tovim. According to Reb Shimon, it has to be considered. It has to be Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot. Doesn't matter when in the year. So if you made a promise after Pesach, then you have 5 Yom Tovim to be able to bring it with you. And the third opinion is you only have 1 Yom Tov. So Rosh Hashana L'Megolim is the concept of Shivit. Then we have the Echad Be'il, the first day of El is Rosh Hashana L'Maisa Behemoth. The 10th of the animal is the Kasidi Kodesh LaHashem. 10th one is a Karban LaHashem. So then every year it says in the pasuk Asa to Asa, and we say Shana b'Shana. Every year you have a different Meiser, and the Meiser they're not talking about just crop. It says twice Masa, Isa Tasa. So one is for Meiser of crop, and one is for Meiser of Behemoth. That those that were born this year and those who are born next year, they should not be mixed together. So Chodesh El is the turnover. Then in Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon, however, disagree. They say Be'echad B'Tishrei. They say it's actually the first day of Tishrei, and we'll see. The Gemara will explain what exactly is the basis of their argument. Then we have the Echad B'Tishrei. The first day of Hoshana is the Hoshana L'Shonim for years. When we talk about creation of the world, we'll talk about later what it means. When it comes to Shemitah, when it comes to Yevus, when does Shemitah begin? When does Yevus begin? When Tishrei comes in, you're no longer permitted to plow, like this year Shemitah, or to plant from the Torah. Linatiyah, if you want to calculate the trees, this is a bit complicated when it comes to trees. The way it works with trees are, actually, you have to stop planting for Orla. The 3 years start from Tu B'Av. If you planted before Tu B'Av, then that's considered a year. Why Tu B'Av? We're just saying here Rosh Hashanah. Because you need 2 weeks for the seeds to take root. This is by a tree, not like an ordinary plant, which is 3 days. It takes 2 weeks. And then we have a month, probably has to be a month before, as we'll see later in the Gemara. So it's Tu B'Av is a turning point. But then, so if you planted before Tu B'Av, then that's already 1 year, and the next year is for another year, and 3 years is Arla. But when it comes to the actually eating the fruits, because early you're not allowed to eat the fruits, we don't say, okay, it's Tishrei now 3 years, you can go ahead and eat the fruits. We don't do that at all. What happens? How does that work? So we'll see in a minute. Yerok is a vegetable. Vegetables. These are all, the turning point is Tishrei. But the Echad B'Shvat Rishon Lil. Okay, so now we had 3 years of Arla, but we don't say comes the first day of Tishrei. Okay, now you can eat the year and they eat the fruits. It doesn't work that way. Now you have to wait for the fruits to blossom, because now the trees are no longer saplings; they are trees. And as far as trees are concerned, the fruits do not count until we come to Shvat. Argument Shaman Hill is the first day of Shvat, and we'll talk about it more later, or is it Tu B'Shvat? The Rebbe explains beautifully, we'll talk about that later, what the base of their argument is. So that's when we look at the fruits. So the Kiddush Beishamai is the first day of Shvat, and Beis Hillel says Bechamisha Osba, the 15th day of Shvat. Okay, that's basically the 4 Rosh Hashanahs. Says the Gemara, what do you mean for kings? He started off saying that for kings. In what way? Give me a practical way that we use this Rosh Hashanah, this first day, this Rosh Hashanah for kings. The Gemara, this is regarding contracts. This is regarding contracts. And what is that? It's now we learned. So we have a concept called every star. When you have a loan and it becomes contractual, then it gives me more powers than just an ordinary loan with 2 witnesses. That I have the right, because it's a contract, people can see it, there's a coil. Any properties that you have become indebted and become collateral for this loan. And if somebody purchases that property after we've contracted this loan, they forfeit the property. The lender goes to the borrower can't pay, goes to one of the properties that was sold and seizes it, and then that purchaser has to go back to his vendor and try to collect money and get reimbursed. Now, if you let's say if you lend the money, borrow the money in the month of Iyar, and then but you didn't write the contract in the month of Sivan, so all you did was you hurt yourself, you harmed yourself, because you delayed the collateral by a month. So if he sold some property between the loan and the time of the writing of the contract, then the lender loses out. That's called a shtar much, and that's all right. But then you have a thing called a shtar mugdim. If I lend the money in the month of Sivan, but I get you to backdate and start to this, so any of the properties that you sold prior to the loan, I want to be able to seize as well. That's cheating. and therefore you forfeit the loan. If Rashi learns that the loan, the contract is forfeited, but the loan is still not only a loan, but you still have witnesses, so I can still collect, prove this, that you owe me the money. And according to others, the entire shtar is useless. You can't use it as evidence at all. That's called a shtar muktim. You're predating it. Now, the way Rashi explains it, and what happens if every king, whatever day he was nominated, that's the day you made him a king. So then, what happens if we see that when the witnesses tell us that they were there by the loan, but they know that the contract was written the month of Kislev. Other witnesses say the loan was done in the month of Sivan. But we don't know if Sivan took place, the loan took place before the contract was written, then it's all right. Or did the loan take place afterwards? Because we don't know when the king became a king. So therefore, we made a special takana that always Sivan comes before Kislev because Nisan is the beginning of the era of the reign of the king, or that's when we start calculating his years. That's what Rashi learns. Tosfos finds it very hard to believe that the Seifrim who write contracts every day don't remember when the king became a king, which month, and the people, the subjects of the king, don't remember when he became a king. And if he was that's how Rashi learns. As we go on further, but Chizah says we learn Shtar Chayiv is written earlier before the deed was done. Psulim is possible. The Rashi learns further. The way I told you before, the way the Rishonim learned that you backdated it. Rashi didn't backdate it. You wrote your shtar in the month of Sivan, and then the loan actually took place in Kislev. That's called predating. Many of the Rishonim argue with that Rashi because they say that if you wrote a shtar in Sivan, even though the loan didn't take place in Kislev, it's as if the loiva indebted himself today, based on the loan you give me then. So it's called a shtari akniyasa. We'll have the first paragraph about Mitzvah all about that. And a shtari akniyasa is perfectly legitimate, because and therefore the loiva owes that property straight away. If somebody bought it a month later, they lose the property if the borrower can't pay when it comes, with the Kislev loan. That's not that means a predated. We're standing in the month of Tammuz and we predated to Ir. That's called a shtar muktim. But the principle is a similar idea as Rashi. Now, in the late shade, we learned if a king was anointed on the 29th day of Adar, he began his reign then. As soon as it reaches the first day of Nisan, also Lishana, that's it. He's already a year of king. But if he assumed the throne only on the first day of Nisan, the year is not considered a full year until the following Nisan, which is what we just learned. We learned also as soon as you reach the last day of Tishrei, it's a year. What is he trying to teach us? That the Nisan, first of all, that the Chodesh Nisan is the turning point. That's when we calculate the years of the reign of the king. And furthermore, where he teaches us is that even though he was only a king for one day, it's considered like a whole year. Like that king in Poland, was Moshe Val. He was a king for one day till they were able to appoint a correct king, and he made a lot of laws then to benefit the Eden, and he's considered a king because a king for one day can be a king for a year. What happens when he appointed the first day? He doesn't. It's not a year till he completes the whole year. So isn't that obvious? If the Shchei Nisan is the turning point, why would you think that if he's a king for a day, he's a king for a year? You got to wait for the whole year till next Nisan before you can count. What happened? They appointed him in Adar. They just didn't coronate him until Nisan. The fact that they appointed him, that's already considered a year. No, it's only when you actually, the pretender of the throne, not just when we just determined that you should become the next king. It's actually when you step up to the throne. We learned, let's say king number one died in the month of Adar, king number two was instated in the same month. So whose year is it? You can either calculate it as the king who died and count it as another year for him, or you can count it for the new king and count this as a first year. What about Meiz ben Nisan? Let's say the king died in Nisan and a new king was stated in Nisan. Again, same thing. You can either count it as the last year of the former king or the first year of the new king. Maze Ba'adar, but the king died in Adar. The Ahmad Acha Tachta Nissen, and the new king was only instated in Nissen. Then Mainin Rishon Lishan, then the first year obviously belongs to the first king, and Vishni Lishani, and Nissen belongs to the new king. So now I'm going to analyze this because everything here seems to be quite obvious, and we don't really need a Raisa to teach any of this. Let's go through this. He said, Maze Ba'adar, if a king died, another king assumed the throne. In the month of Adar, you have a choice now. You count for either one. You can either count for the former king, or you can count as his last year, or the new king, and you count it as the first year. So, isn't that obvious? No. I would have thought you cannot give the same year to two different kings because it's confusing. I would have thought that if that guy, if the former king, passed away, died in the month of Adar, the majority of the year he was the king, then that year should be his, and let's start the new king the following year. That's what you would have thought. Commercial doesn't work that way. You have an option. You give a year to each one, and you can't tell me the chiddush is the same shit. Obviously, you can't tell me the chiddush is that you can have 1 year that overlaps two different kings. We already know that from the previous piece. In the month he died, and other you have a choice either dating it back to the first king or to the second king. So what's the chiddush by telling us if he died in this and the same thing? Pshita? No. I would have thought. Ki Amrina, when do we say Yom Echad B'Shana Choshev Shana? When do we say that 1 year, 1 day in the year is considered a whole year B'Sof Shana? Okay, that this new king reigned the last day of the year. It's as if he reigned the entire year. Aval B'Tchila Shana, but the former king who managed to put a few days into this. Lo Yamrina, we don't say that a few days into the year is like a whole year. Kamashlan, that even that we do as well. Maze Ba'adar, if he died in Adar, the king died in Adar, and the new king was instated in Nisan. So therefore, the previous year is considered part of the former king, and Nisan is considered the new year for the new king. Obviously, isn't that obvious? Why shouldn't you do that way? How else would you do it? No, in the case, the Aimno led him Adar. We appointed him in the month of Adar. Now, to teach us that if you're appointed in the month of Adar and that he took the position in the month of Nisan, that we don't look at the time when you appointed him, but rather when he took the position, we already know from the top of the page. But there's one more variable there. Umelech ben Melech, he is the next heir. He is obviously the obvious choice, and he's the candidate to be king because he is the prince. So I would have thought, and we know when it comes to royalty, it passes down to Yerusha. It's an inheritance that goes from father to son. So I would have thought in this case, since it's not just that we know that he's going to become the king. It's already his rightful position even before we said anything. And as soon as his father died, he vacated the throne. Then the son automatically told that he still is not a king until they actually coronate him. And that's the chiddush that it doesn't start till Nisan. How do you know when it comes to kings that Taka Nisan is the month that we calculate as the new year? It says when Shlomo Melech built the base of English, it was 480 years. 480 years. Let's say Bnei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim. 480 years after the Eden left Mitzrayim. That is when Shlomo Melech started to build the Beis Hamikdash. And when is that? B'Shana Levi, the fourth year of his reign. B'Chodesh Ziv, the month of Ziv. All the months in the Torah generally are the first month, the second month, third month. They don't have any names. In fact, it says that the names that we have for the Chadashim were taken with the Eden from Bavel. It came back from Bavel with these names. So all the months that we have don't have names. There are a couple of months that we have, like Chodesh Adar, which is Megillas Esther. A few months have names. And the month of Iyar used to be called Chodesh of Ziv, the month of glory, the month when as we'll see, the others, we'll see later. But Chodesh Ziv was known as the month of Iyar. So therefore, it says here, 480 years, the fourth year of his reign in the second month of the year, which is the month of the month of Iyar. Who Chodesh Hasheni L'Melech Shlomo Yisrael. This is the second month of the king Yisrael. So Shlomo Melech became king the second month. That means Nisan was the first month, 4 years earlier. So we see clearly that a king's reign starts counting from the month of Nisan. And how do you know that from the month of Nisan you start counting the reign? Because Makish, we equate Malchus Shlomo Mitzrayim. We equate The Malchus of Shlomo too, and the Eden left Mitzrayim. Ma Yitzis Mitzrayim and Nisan, just like the Eden left Mitzrayim, we know it was a month of Nisan after Malchus Shlomo and Nisan. So we must say that also Shlomo's reign started counting from this. Says the Gemara, how do you know? We know the Eden left Mitzrayim and Nisan, but how do you know that every year Nisan thereafter becomes year number 2, year number 3? Maybe Tishrei is when you start counting. He left Nisan, but once he reaches Tishrei, that's when's year number 2. How do you know that Nisan is the turning point when you start counting the years? Says the Gemara, we see it Mitzrayim with Manola. How do you know the Mitzrayim itself? The Nisan Manina, we count from Nisan. Dilma mit Tishrei Manina. Maybe we count from Tishrei. He says, well, no. Let's talk about that. Can't think that. See if it says Ayal Aaron HaKoyen went up to the mountain when he passed away. We're going to prove that Nisan, that Yitzis Mitzrayim, we count the years it's Mitzrayim, we date it from the month of Nisan, and that's every year Nisan becomes another year. And what it says that Aaron HaKoyen when climbed up the mount, Hashem Api Hashem, Vayom Hashem, he passed away there. What year was it? Vishnasa Boim, 40 years. Lot says B'nai Yisrael, he left Mitzrayim. The Chodesh HaChamishi, the month of the Echad LaChodesh, the first day of the month. Okay, Uksiv, it says in another pasuk in the beginning of Dvarim, Vahi Ba'ar Boim Shana, the 40th year, Ba'ashte Asa Chodesh, the 11th month, which is Shvat, the Echad LaChodesh, first day of Shvat, Diba Moshe spoke. With the Koiba of the correlation Nasa Boim, we're talking about Av, and we're calling it the 40th year. Aaron passed away, which in the day of the Chayzav. The Koiba Shvat, then we talk about Shvat. The Korele, and we call it Shnasa Boim. We call that also we call that in the same year. We call that the 11th month. Doesn't that prove that Av is first and Shvat is later? So it means, so when does the year turn? Obviously, Nisan is when the year begins. When you talk about Yitzis Mitzrayim, McLeod, the Rosh Hashana Daf Tishrei is a proof that what? That Rosh Hashana was not Tishrei, Rosh Hashana was actually Nisan. Says the Gemara, if it's not Tishrei, then obviously it must be Nisan. By Aaron says clearly that's the 5th month, and we're dating it back to Yitzis Mitzrayim. Okay, that's all we know from there. But when it comes to the pasuk, the 11th month, who says that we're dating it to Yitzis Mitzrayim? Maybe we're dating Elohim and Mighty to Mitzrayim. How do you know it's to the year of Mitzrayim? Maybe it's the year when they set up the Mishkan. Remember, they set up the Mishkan this next year in Nisan. Maybe Tishrei is the turning point. And it was the next year, and when you talk about the 11th month, it was the next year Tishrei that they counted the years. And therefore, and they're talking about Hakamas HaMishkan. So the Gemara says, and we're not dating it to Mitzrayim at all. Papa says, Shnas Esim Shana Esim L'Gzeida Shabbat. Says twice, Shnas Esim. So we have a Gzeida Shabbat. We have a make Gzeida Shabbat, and between as the Papa heard from his Rebbe that we have a Gzeida Shabbat to tell you exactly when these 20 years is, just like we'll see later what he's talking about there. So the same thing over here. We'll see tomorrow. Since the Torah says down, 40th year by Aaron, it says 40th year by Moshe Rabbeinu, when it comes to the 11th month, and doesn't specify 40th year to what. And by one of them it says it's Yitzis Mitzrayim. We're going to say that the other one, 40th year, also is the same one. It's Gzeida Shavah, and Rashi says it's not just a binyan now we're drawing a simile. This is actually Gzeida Shavah that a papa would have heard from his Rebbe. Mark Conley, Yitzis Mitzrayim, just like here it says clearly in the pasuk, 40 years by Aaron, it says we're dating it back to Yitzis Mitzrayim. Avkan here too, Yitzis Mitzrayim, we're dating it back to Yitzis Mitzrayim. Says the Gemara, but who told you that Av happened first and Shvat happened later, and therefore you're assuming that Yitzis Mitzrayim is a turning point? Who told you the story of happened first? Maybe Shvat happened first. Maybe what Moshe Rabbeinu got up to talk to the Eden on the first day of Shvat happened first, and therefore Rosh Hashana in the both 40th year, but Tishrei is when we count the years, not Nisan, and therefore Shvat, which is the 11th month of Yitzis Mitzrayim, true, but it's not but when it comes to 40th year or 39th year, we're counting from Tishrei. So maybe Shvat happened first. Moshe Rabbeinu spoke to Eden first. Adam passed away afterwards, and that's what happened. Excuse me. Loy, sorry, no, so I can't think that way. See, it's a pasuk. Achrei, it says the pasuk. Achrei hakoisei es Sichon melech hamoedi. Moshe Rabbeinu was talking to the Eden after they were smitten Sichon, and so after the war. Now we know, when did Sichon attack the Eden? As we'll soon prove, Sichon attacked the Eden right after Aaron passed away, which means that the events of Aaron passing away took place before Moshe Rabbeinu spoke to the Eden, because Moshe Rabbeinu spoke to the Eden after destroying Sichon, which happened after Aaron passed away. That's how we know that Of happened before Shvat, and then since the both 40th year of Yetzias Mitzrayim, and obviously when it comes to dating Yetzias Mitzrayim, it's from the month of Nisan. And how do we know that? The Chinuch Nafshei, the Aaron, we know when Aaron passed away, Sichon was still alive. So it must be that Moshe Rabbeinu killed Sichon was after Aaron passed away. And how do we know that? You see, it says in Pasuk, Yishma HaKanani, the Kanani heard, as we'll soon see, that the Kanani is actually referring to Amalek Melech Harod, and Ma Shmua Shama, what actually did he, we'll soon see, Ma Shmua Shama, what did the Kanani hear, the king of Harod? Shama Shemes Aaron. He heard that Aaron passed away, and V'nistalko Nani HaKavod, and he heard that the clouds of glory that protected Bnei Yisrael disappeared. The Eden now vulnerable. So in other words, this event happened after Aaron passed away. Ukasover, he thought, Nitna Reshus Lilachem Yisrael, Eden now vulnerable, I can go and attack Eden. This was says the Pasuk by Yidu Kol Ha'eda, that the people saw and they realized, it was revealed to them, Ki Gava Aaron. Something happened, as we'll soon see, something happened outside of them that made them realize that Aaron passed away and they lost something major. Ki Gava Aaron. Don't read Vayiru, they saw the Ela Vayiro, that it became evident to them by something else happening. And that is Kiddush Lakish, Ki Mishamish Bedalish Ki have 4 different meanings. If Dilma, perhaps Ela that. And therefore, they then, when Arad wanted to attack them, Melech wanted to attack them, they then realized what Aaron did and the loss that they had. They lost their Nani HaKavod. What does that have to do with Sichon? Says the Gemara, meet dummy. Hasam Canaan, they were talking about the king of Canaan, and Hachas Sichon. Here we're talking about the events of Sichon. When did it occur? And you're telling me that Sichon happened after Aaron passed away, and then Moshe Rabbeinu spoke to the Eden after they've beaten Sichon in the war. So obviously you're saying that the events are happening the same year, but Moshe happened after Aaron. That's a story about a Kanani Melech Harod, and we're talking about Sichon, a different nation altogether. Says Gemara, no. Tana, we learned who Sichon, who Arad, who Canaan. Canaan, Sichon, Arad were all the same person. Rashi Chumash says it was Amalek, but here the Gemara says it was Sichon. And Taisa brings down here that the Medrash says that it was actually Amalek. What do you call it? And why is that? So how do we learn? How can we both be true? So Amalek or Sichon? So Taisa says actually there's no stira. Amalek dressed up like Sichon, and therefore Sichon was still around. Even Amalek, it was Amalek, but they dressed up like Sichon. If Sichon was beaten in the war, what's the point of Sichon? People knew that they were fakes. They weren't around. So they dressed up like Sichon because everybody feared the nation of Sichon. So that proved that Sichon was still around. So it wasn't Sichon who actually, Yishma HaKanani was actually Amalek, but they behaved like Sichon. So therefore we know that Sichon was still around. And now, so how can you have 3 names? So we're saying as follows. Who's Sichon? He was Sichon and Arad and Canaan are all one and the same. Sichon, why is he called Sichon? Is similar to a young horse. Canaan, why is he called Canaan? Why is he called Canaan? So we say Al Shem Malchusay, because that was the name of his kingdom. But Mashmoy, what was his personal name? Arad Shmoy. So his name was Arad. Sichain, because they were nimble, it's like a colt, young horse, and the nation is called Canaan. That's one version. Ikidami, others say Arad Shadaymila Arud, similar to a wild donkey, the Midbar. Canaan Hashem Achusi, the kingdom is called Canaan, but his real name was Sichon Shmoy. Either way, we're saying that Sichon still existed after Aaron passed away because they heard about the cloud, the glory disappearing, and then Moshe had a war with them, and then Moshe spoke to Eden, Achrei HaKaisei. So obviously it all happened the same year, which proves that Av happened before Tishrei, and therefore when it comes to Nisan is when is the turning point. So then the Gemara is going to continue going through each month of the year. So all we know is that Av and Shvat in the same year. But who told you Nisan? Maybe it was Tammuz, maybe it was Sivan, maybe it was here. And the Gemara will go through each one, and we'll continue tomorrow in Mitzvah on the same subject.